Today we're going to be looking at one perfect transfer each club still has to make this coming summer. Now, all 20 of these suggestions were sent in by fans of those clubs on Twitter. I've got the names in front of me and I've got 5 different categories to place them into. All of these names have been linked in some form with that club over the last couple of months. They're in no particular order, but we're going to start with Chelsea's new look pursuit for Samu Omorodion. I really hope that's how you pronounce it, by the way. Now, when I say new look, it's not really that new of a look, is it? Chelsea have been chasing Omorodion for quite some time now. They've been looking to add the 20-year-old attacker to their ranks, looking to add more depth in the number 9 position, seemingly, despite the fact they've currently got Nicholas Jackson on the books, and still on the books, Broja, Lukaku, David Fofana. So on the surface of it, you're looking at this as a move that doesn't make loads of sense. The very best of Samu Omorodion is really in the box or running into space. He actually gets into great positions to take his shots. He was running at over 0.5 non-penalty expected goals per 90 last season. So he's an impressive space finder in the box, as you can see from his shot location map. But he's not amazing in build-up. If you take into context a player like Nicholas Jackson, who's already on the books, Omorodion is putting up probably half the creative numbers Jackson is. So I think there's really 2 ways you can look at this. Is he a different option to Jackson, a more physical presence? He clocked the fastest speed of any player in La Liga, according to Marca last season. Or is he a player that doesn't quite fit? Another depth option, another young player that Chelsea are kind of hoarding at this stage? At the moment, I think it's slightly confused, but he could well prove a lot of people wrong. There is a huge upside with this signing. Next, we're going to Southampton, and the fan suggestion for them was the current transfer target of Fabio Carvalho. Now, this is a really interesting one because they've already had a £15 million bid rejected, so we know the interest is definitely there. He had a really impressive campaign last season in the Championship with Hull. I do like him, and I think it's definitely needed that creative spark, that little bit of energy from wide areas that can also play in the 10 role for Southampton. So if they can get him for a decent fee, this is a nice move. But I think there are potentially bigger target areas for Southampton. I look at goal scoring in particular as a necessity, especially when you consider that 50% of their top 8 goal scorers, 4 of them have left the club. Now, I'm not saying these were performers at the Premier League level. Look at Che Adams, scored a lot of goals at Championship level, never really cut the mustard for Southampton in the Prem. But Adam Armstrong is going to need support. And does that support come from Carvalho? Well, I think he can certainly chip in with goals. As we saw last season, 9 goals in that Hull campaign. But his overall numbers don't reflect a player that's going to put up big goal numbers. His expected goals are quite low. He's more of a creative force than a natural goal scorer, in my opinion. So I still think Southampton need a striker, but nevertheless, Carvalho for 20 million odd pounds, that's a nice move. Let's go to Brighton, because Mats Hummels has been linked with the club. What a fantastic rumour. First and foremost, let's just get out of the way. This is a world-class transfer rumour. But does it make sense for Brighton? 35 years old now. He is, of course, a free transfer, and he's hovering on the fence between retirement and a future move. Personally, I think it's slightly confused. Like, he did have a good season last year at Dortmund, but it was the lowest amount of starts of his professional career, basically, since 2008. I think it was 20 Bundesliga starts. I think his physicality was waning in that Dortmund side. Does the Premier League highlight that even more? I look at Brighton's centre-back pairing of Lewis Dunk and Van Hecke. Van Hecke, of course, was the Brighton player of the season last year. Where does Hummels fit into that partnership? Does he usurp Dunk? Obviously, he would bring a bunch of experience, huge know-how to a very young squad. I don't know. I'm really torn on this because the romantic side of me is like, it's class, man. Hummels to Brighton. But the logical part of my brain is like 35-year-old centre-back coming to the Premier League. To be fair, we saw it Thiago Silva at Chelsea. If Hummels could be Brighton's Thiago Silva, do you know what? Just for the romantic side of it, I'm bumping it to a nice move. Let's go to Bournemouth, who might well have to replace Dominic Solanke. We're going to talk about him later. And the suggestion from Bournemouth fans was Eddie Nketiah. I'm not sure. And the reason I'm not sure is simply because we don't have the data to support whether or not Eddie Nketiah is ready to lead the line for a team that are probably going to be pushing the top 10 in the Premier League this year. Dominic Solanke was fantastic last year, 19 goals, constantly involved in build-up, a real press machine. Can Eddie Nketiah perform to that level? Well, the numbers don't suggest he can. He has never started more than 10 Premier League games in a single season, and he's never scored more than 5 Premier League goals in a single campaign. Obviously, his youth level numbers and his finishing ability, as we've seen at certain parts of his career, get people very excited, and there's certainly a decent player in Eddie Nketiah. But the fee being mooted, £25 million or more, does Eddie Nketiah fit a Dominic Solanke-sized hole? Does he replace that output? I think it's slightly confused for me. Let's go to Crystal Palace, who might well have to sign a replacement for Mark Guéhi, which is a massive role to fill. Obviously, we've seen Chadi Riyad join the club already, likely to play on the left-hand side of that back three if that's what Ole Glasner operates with next season. I was expecting Mark Guéhi to operate in the right centre-back role, where we saw Nathaniel Clyne having to play at times, but instead he is going to Newcastle potentially. We're going to talk about that one later, and that means Palace are on the search for a centre-back, and the Palace fans were suggesting to me that the rumour they want to see happen is Maxence Lacroix. And on the surface of it, it's very easy to see why. Big physical presence, 6'3", covers the ground really well. At just 24 years old, you can expect him to improve under a top-level coach like Ole Glasner. I do like this move, but at the right fee. His underlying numbers are pretty impressive, and when you think back to that Wolfsburg team last season, I think by expected goals against, they put up about the 5th best defensive record in the league. And he played a big role in that, putting up the 4th most minutes of any player in the squad. But the reason I really do think this is a nice move is with just 1 year left on his contract, I expect Palace to be able to get him for a fairly reasonable fee. We've seen him linked with much bigger clubs than Palace in the past. They've obviously dipped into players like Chadi Riyad, who, was part of the La Masia Academy, didn't quite go to the next level. They're hoping for success there. Can they take a player like Maxence Lacroix and improve him too? I think Glasner can. Let's go to Everton, who are looking at Calvin Phillips. Obviously, defensive midfield is an area they're looking to adjust, or central midfield, to be honest with you, following the sales of Amadou Onana, and of course the exit of Andre Gomez, although he didn't get many minutes. Now, Tim Oregbenham has come into the club already. He's looked pretty lively in pre-season, but I think they are looking for more experience alongside him, and at 27 years old, Calvin Phillips definitely offers that. But is it positive experience? We saw last season his loan move to West Ham was frankly a disaster. Despite this, Sean Dyche clearly believes he can get something out of a player like Calvin Phillips, whose value is going to be extremely low. This is probably going to be a loan move with a bit of a loan fee, maybe an option to buy. And if we look back at his Leeds days, there is certainly positive attributes to his game. His passing ability from long range was excellent. His defensive ability in transition, slightly underrated, and certainly rated by a coach like Marcelo Bielsa. So if Sean Dyche thinks he can get him back to that level, more power to him. Do I think he can get back to that level? I hope so, for the sake of Calvin Phillips' career, because it's almost been a shame to watch him at Manchester City. Pre-season at times we've seen him playing at centre-back for City. That can't continue. I think this is mid for me right now. Villa fans, obviously, still talking about João Felix. We talked about him in last week's episode, so we're not going to go into loads of detail. I do still think there is a role in there for him, especially with the exit of Moussa Diaby to Saudi Arabia. I said last week it's top tier. I still think it's top tier today. Talking of Manchester City, of course, Julian Alvarez looks like he's leaving the club for a huge fee, by the way. A huge fee. And despite the fact there haven't been loads of links, and potentially they won't even replace Julian Alvarez, Man City fans wanted me to talk about the rumour that sprung up in the Telegraph involving Pedro Neto. And this is interesting because Pedro Neto, not a like-for-like replacement in any way for Julian Alvarez. Where does he fit with Oscar Bob's emergence in pre-season on that right-hand side and the clear trust that's going to be shown in him there, and the arrival of Savio? Well, we certainly know there is an excellent player in there, super creative, an amazing 1v1 dribbler, so aggressive, that low centre of gravity, putting up nearly 6 progressive carries per 90. That is unbelievable. But the issue develops in his playing time. Are City willing to sanction a big money bid, which is probably what Wolves are going to want for a player who's still only 24, when he's only put up one consistent season without injuries? His hamstrings last year looked like they were made of glass. I felt so sorry for him. So with the injury record, the big fee, and I don't really see how he replaces Julian Alvarez. I think I would rather spend that money on a backup to Erling Haaland or a backup to Rodri, either of those two positions, before focusing on a right winger. This is confused for me. Fulham fans obviously suggesting Scott McTominay, potentially a third bid going in for him. Manchester United looking for close to £30 million for the player who's got just 1 year left on his contract. And I think people almost forget now that Scott McTominay is 27 years old. I love him. Great squad player, great attitude, big goal scoring numbers from midfield, top 1% of midfielders in terms of shots, XG. He is a box crasher. The best of Scott McTominay is working in and around the box, finding space, almost in striker positions. Of course, in the youth academy, he grew up as a striker, which is why I think he has such a knack for finding opportunities. So if Fulham are going to buy him as a box-crashing 10 who scores goals from midfield, because they need some more goals from midfield, you know, behind Rodrigo, Muniz and Jimenez, I don't think anybody put up more than 6 goals for them last season. Scott McTominay would be a fine fit. If they're signing him as a João Palhinha replacement or anybody in that deep midfield role, I don't get it. So where do we put Scott McTominay? I think given that Emile Smith-Rowe has joined, is he going to want to play in that 10 space? And if he's going to want to play in that 10 space, where's McTominay going to play? Who's the defensive midfield replacement for João Palhinha? Slightly confused about it all again. This column's building up. Let's go to Liverpool fans' suggestions of Martin Zubimendi. Of course, David Ornstein releasing an Athletic report this week that suggested Liverpool still looking for that number 6. Doesn't come as a huge surprise to any of us, does it? Given Endo's age, the sales we saw last summer, I expect Bajcetic to have a huge season, but I still think they need reinforcements in the defensive midfield role to allow McAllister to play higher up the pitch. And is Martin Zubimendi that guy? Well, Liverpool fans are getting very excited about rumours linking him to the club, and it's easy to see why. I don't see why Martin Zubimendi hasn't had more links to top-level clubs this summer. With a €50 million release clause, at 25 years old, full Spain international, his ability on the ball, surely more clubs are interested. I particularly like Zubimendi and McAllister as a deep-line double pivot with Trent Alexander-Arnold tucking in, freeing McAllister to join the attack. That sounds very exciting to me. I think this is a really nice move. I think, to be honest with you, whoever gets Zubimendi, if anybody gets Zubimendi at that fee, it's a very nice move. Let's go to Tottenham's pursuit of Dominic Solanke for a reported £65 million. He, of course, signed a new contract that includes a release clause. And I think to some level, this is a bit of a gamble at £65 million because we've seen one top elite level season of him in the Premier League, and that came last year. You know, he is just 26 years old. 22 goal involvements was extremely impressive. And to be honest with you, it wasn't just his goals. It was his link-up play. It was his off-the-ball work rate. And it was the first time it felt like he'd worked with a coach to the level, no disrespect to his previous coaches, of Andoni Iraola, who I think is one of the best managers in the entire Premier League. So does that mean that the higher calibre of players around him, the higher calibre of coaching, Solanke goes to a whole new level? Or does this mean we see a revert to type for Dominic Solanke? 6 goals in 33. 3 goals in 32. I'm positive about this one. I'm going to say that Dominic Solanke, if he goes to Tottenham, is the starting number 9. It allows Son to go back out onto the left. I think this one, even though it's expensive, is a nice move. Arsenal fans, look, I mean, it was unrealistic. The 2 suggestions that everybody was throwing at me was Victor Osimhen or Alexander Isak. Now, neither of these are going to happen. Sadly, Alexander Isak is the player we're going to talk about. I just think it's too much money. At 24 years old, with that extremely long contract and a clear desire, to be honest with you, to stay and play for Newcastle, we've seen no indication of him kicking up a fuss. In fact, we've seen the direct opposite, really. We've seen him talking about how much he wants to be a Newcastle player. I think Arsenal should almost hold their cash and be looking to move for Alexander Isak next year. You know, if they go into a move as Premier League champions, saying to Alexander Isak, we can offer you this as the number 9 at the club, I think next summer, potentially, far more likely than this summer. This summer's just a no chance. Let's go to Brentford, whose fans, and me included, still think they need to sign some fullbacks. I still potentially think they need to sign a striker as well, especially after Igor Thiago's injury. But a suggestion that I made earlier in the window, seemingly still being linked, is Patrick Dorgu. Now, at just 19 years old for Lecce, his underlying numbers were super impressive, especially in attacking areas, as was his versatility. And that versatility has led for some of Europe's biggest clubs to be linked with him, especially in Italy, also in the Premier League. Do Brentford now still have a chance of signing a player like Patrick Dorgu? Well, I think it would be a huge statement signing. I personally believe this would almost be a wow. Do I see it happening? No. I have to put it in nice move though, at least, because Brentford need a fullback and he would be some capture. Let's talk about Newcastle, and obviously all of their fans were chatting about Mark Gahey. Mark Gahey's proposed £65+ million move to the Magpies. Simply put, I think this is a wow transfer. And the reason for that is that he's still just 24 years old. He's been an incredibly consistent performer for Crystal Palace. Despite the fact he only put up 23 starts last season because of injury, I wouldn't be worried. The previous 3 seasons went 40 starts, 36, 37. This is one of the future England centre-backs. His ability on the ball is superb. He's athletic. He is a great out-and-out defender despite his physical presence, because he stands at only 5'11.5", 6 foot tall. He's not the most physically imposing, but his intelligence with his movement and his positioning makes up for that. A defensive partnership of Botman and Gahey at 24 years old, it's so good. And when you think about this potentially being Paul Mitchell's first statement as Newcastle sporting director, it doesn't get bigger really, does it? This is a pilfering. Liverpool should be interested here. Man United should be interested in here. Honestly, every top club should be interested in Mark Gahey. His temperament, his leadership. He's a captain at Crystal Palace. When you interview him and you speak to him, he is just an awesome person. I think this is one of the signings of the summer if it happens. Next up, we go to Ipswich and their proposed move for Jack Clarke. That is still rumbling behind the scenes. Obviously, the Jadon Philogene transfer collapsed and he ended up going to Aston Villa. So it appears they're still in the market for a talented young wide player. And with 39 goal involvements across his last 2 campaigns in the Championship, it's easy to see why. I mean, his progressive ability is just unbelievable. I mean, these numbers are not normal for wingers. Like 8 progressive carries, 4 successful take-ons. His ability to receive the ball on the half turn and play very quickly is just such a fun watch. He's going to be a bit more expensive than I think Ipswich would like to spend, but he might be worth it. I think this is a nice move again. Sorry, Sunderland fans. I know you want to keep him. David Datro Fofana continues to be linked with a move away from Chelsea, who have stockpiled strikers, as I spoke about earlier. And Leicester are very interested. It's no real surprise. You know, Jamie Vardy, 18 goals in the Championship last season, coming towards the twilight of his career. Patson Daka, who I think got 7 goals in the Championship last season and hasn't proven at any stage he can score Premier League goals. I think it's 4 and 5 in his 2 campaigns there. So does David Datro Fofana offer another exciting option? Well, it's hard to judge him because he hasn't spent loads of time anywhere. That breakout campaign at Mulder in which he scored 15 goals hasn't really been developed upon. You know, Burnley was okay, but not loads of game time. I think for now, let's just put this in mid, but he could surprise some people. Let's go to Nottingham Forest, whose fans wanted me to talk about Santiago Jimenez, of course, who has been leading the line for Arne Slot's Feyenoord, the Mexican striker, who's got a reported transfer fee, you know, €50 million. And for me, I'm sorry, Forest fans, I think that's too much money. There's no doubt he's been putting up great numbers in the Eredivisie. His expected goals, his shot numbers, his shot locations all look really strong in a very dominant Feyenoord side. But to spend €50 million on a striker, I think you've got to have a real need there. And I don't think Forest do. Because Chris Wood was included in the Forest retain list. He put up 0.6 expected goals last season. That was in the top 10% of strikers in Europe. And that ended up coming out to 14 Premier League goals. Taiwo Awoniyi is also on the books. He only started 12 games last season because of Chris Wood's form and injury. We've seen what he can do at the Premier League level. So is there a need to spend €50 million on a striker with these 2 on your books? I don't think there is. West Ham's pursuit of Aaron Wan-Bissaka continues. And as I said last week, I think this is a nice move. Really good fee at £18 million for a player who's still only 26 years old, who is under contract for one more year, but has proven to be a lights-out defensive specialist. I think when he's not asked to be on the ball as much as he is at Manchester United, he's going to look even better. And I think it's a Kufau upgrade, who started 32 of the 38 Premier League games last season at 31 years old. It makes sense for everybody, even with Ben Johnson leaving the club. Manchester United fans wanted me to talk about the Matthijs de Ligt transfer, which is continuing to rumble on. But before we get into Matthijs de Ligt, let's talk about two other Manchester United transfer rumours that popped up yesterday and caused a bit of a stir. The first of which is Sander Berge, the Burnley midfielder, potentially joining the club with the Ugarte deal seemingly falling through. Now, I've seen a lot of hyperbole from other Manchester United fans and other YouTubers about this transfer, calling it a joke, laughing at it. I don't really agree. I think this is a very clear departure from how Manchester United have done business in the past, where they've panicked, they've gone out, they've signed a huge money player that doesn't necessarily fit a system. Sander Berge feels like quite a natural fit for this system. He's not the perfect player and he's probably not a guaranteed starter, but as a deep-lying midfielder in a squad rotation role, I quite like it. He would surely cost, sub £10 million with a pretty decent array of Premier League experience, and when you think of him at his best, he's really been in the most dominant sides in the Championship. His numbers were absolutely fantastic at progressing the ball through passing and carrying, playing under pressure. Hopefully, those numbers could translate to Manchester United. Would I rather pay £10 million for Sander Berge or £15 to £18 million for Sofian Amrabat based on last season? It's a pretty close call, so I have very little issue with a signing like this as a squad option. The other name that was linked in the midfield role yesterday was Yusuf Fofana. Now, his proposed move to AC Milan seems like it's hanging by a thread at this stage. Manchester United looking to move in for a player who's got just 1 year left on his contract, a senior France international who, again, I think would be a great signing. What United have sometimes lacked in the deeper lying midfield roles is progressive pass ability, a player that can pick it up quite deep and move it in between the lines into the third phase. That is something Fofana is pretty excellent at. He's putting up 8.5 progressive passes for a Monaco side that finished second in Ligue 1 last year. At a decent fee, this is a good move. But let's get back to another deal I love, de Ligt. I really like this signing. At 50 million euros or anything cheaper, it's amazing. He's still only 24 years old. His natural leadership abilities have shone ever since he was 17 at Ajax, hence why he's been at times captain of pretty much every club he's played at. Even in his final season in Italy, people were kind of laughing at him, talking about him in a negative way. He put the most minutes of any player in the squad. Juventus fans were starting to come round to him being a potential successor to a Bonucci, to a Chiellini. The move to Bayern Munich happens. Bayern Munich fans, in their droves, want to keep Matthijs de Ligt. There's a petition with over 80,000 signatures on it, demanding the club stick with him. They're going to offload him. They want to bring in Jonathan Tah. Fine, maybe that's Vincent Kompany's plan in action. He fits in so many good boxes for Manchester United. Right-sided centre-back, good age, more physicality, has worked with the coach before. I kind of am putting it in, wow, if that deal gets done at like £40 million, given some of the other fees we've seen for centre-backs this summer. And whilst we're on the topic of centre-backs, let's talk about Wolves, who are still on the hunt to replace Max Kilman. And as Wolves fans were suggesting, I think a great shout. Trevor Chalobah. He is a good price because Chelsea are basically forcing him out of the club. Obviously didn't travel on the pre-season tour. He's a really strong personality who last season towards the back end came in and kind of revolutionised the backline. They were a total mess. Obviously in the final 13 matches where we saw the real uptick of Chelsea's form, Chalobah started 10 of them. They won 7 of them. They drew 3 of them. I still find it slightly bizarre he's being offloaded with such ease by Chelsea and doesn't have more suitors at a fee that could be less than £20 million. This would be a great signing for Wolves. It absolutely would be. But what do you think about the suggestions for each club's perfect signing for the next month of transfer window? Let me know in the comments below.